We are having experience. We're not merely identical to our experience. And this point of view is really vulnerable to inquiry. I mean, if this seems just impossibly abstract, by analogy, I just want to point out to you, maybe I can tie it down to something that we all know is so. We all know we have an optic blind spot. We all know that the optic nerve passes through the retina, and so there's a point in our visual fields where we're not getting any information. We've all probably had this demonstration done in class where you do a mark on a piece of paper and you play with it and you get the mark to disappear. Now, so it is true of you now. There's, as you look out across the room, there's somebody very likely missing a head, and you're not noticing it. It's falling in your blind spot. It is possible to be made to notice this. Most people don't notice it. Even those of us who know about it go for decades without noticing it. And yet it is there, available to be noticed. There is an analogous insight into the nature of consciousness that is just as on the surface as that. It tends to be harder to notice. I mean, it requires most people some training in meditation to notice it. But it is possible to notice that consciousness, that in you which is aware of your experience, does not feel like I. And there's a wealth of testimony on how this can change a person's experience of the world for the better. I mean, there's a kind of mystical well-being that is compatible with going into a cave for a year. I mean, going into a cave, for most of us, going into a cave for a year is synonymous with everything we don't want to happen to us. It separates us from everything we want out of life. It's rather interesting to point out that solitary confinement is considered a punishment even in a prison. And yet you have contemplatives who are willing and made really quite happy by running this experiment on themselves, going into a cave for vast amounts of time and practicing meditation. My argument to you is we have to bring this end of the human this end of the spectrum of human experience into the data of our worldview. We have to understand the possibilities of the plasticity of human experience. And our conception of human well-being has to include this. So in conclusion, I want to say that what we really need is a contemplative science. We need a way of talking about human well-being and the possibilities of human happiness that is as totally unconstrained by dogma as science is. We need to find a way of talking about the reality of death. The fact that we are all going to die is an astonishing situation. If you can just hold on long enough, you are going to witness the death of everyone you love. And this is everyone's experience. No one is going to escape this. If it is possible to be happy in this condition, if it is possible to be deeply happy in this condition, we need to understand this in terms that don't rely on divisive superstitions. If there's an important role for ritual in our lives, if we need to mark those occasions in every human life, birth and weddings and deaths with profundity, if this is actually doing some serious work for us, we need to understand this in rational terms. We need to develop language that is not first century superstition. So one way to summarize what I've said to you is that I'm really arguing that every one of us is a scientist, in that every one of us is making a claim about the way the world is. Every one of us wants to understand reality. None of us want to be confused. None of us want to be mistaken about the situation we're in. But there are areas of intellectual honesty in our culture where science is good, and there are areas where we have a fundamental double standard, where certainty has been unlinked from evidence. But just as everyone is a scientist, everyone is also a mystic, in the sense that every one of us has been born into a circumstance where we are helplessly seeking happiness in a condition where experience is always changing. What you get, you lose. And we are all interested, whether we have time to think about it or not, we are all interested in finding just how happy, how much well-being can be enjoyed in this circumstance, and in designing a civilization that can promote it. So I'm just asking you to imagine what it would be like to have a society where our conversation about human well-being could proceed totally unconstrained by dogma, where really we could bring the full measure of our creativity to bear on questions of human happiness. And my argument is that to get there, to get from here to there, the end game for civilization is not mere tolerance of other people's irrationality. It is not political correctness. It is reason. Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right. As your questions are being collected, they're going to be brought to me. And meanwhile, while they're being brought, I will start off, Sam, with a few questions. One of the questions I'm asked most frequently in interviews is, and I've been asked it many times, what's to prevent you from going out and committing murder if you don't believe in God? What do you say to people who insist that there can never be any morality without religion?
Well, yeah, as you say, this is an incredibly common question, and we're all wise to prepare an answer for it. I happen to have one. I mean, one counterpoint to this suspicion is, if you just look at the societies where there's the least homicide, the least violent crime, these really are the most atheistic societies on the planet. I mean, if you just look at the UN Development Index, which ranks societies by violent crime, by literacy, by educational attainment, by per capita income, without exception, apart from the presence of the United States somewhere in the top 20, these are the most atheistic societies on the planet. Societies like the Netherlands and Canada and Australia, Sweden. There is no evidence whatsoever that high levels of religious adherence leads to a moral society. In fact, if you look at within our own culture, if you look at the red state, blue state divide, where are most of the murders occurring? Where are most of the teen pregnancies even, and even the abortions? These are happening in those states that have the highest level of religious adherence.
Okay. Here come your questions. I'll ask you one more while I vet these. I'd like you to pick up on some of the things you said about Eastern religion, because it seems to me that, in a way, you give Eastern religions kind of a pass on the whole issue of rationality. For example, the Dalai Lama just had a piece in the New York Times, which I'm sure everyone here read, and there didn't seem to me to be much difference between his views on the relationship between religion and science and that of the moderate Western religions you criticize. Would you comment on that?
Yeah, well, one problem is that we have this one word, religion, and as though this named a really homogeneous class of infatuations and doctrines. And it doesn't. I mean, religion is a word like drug. I mean, there are drugs. You have aspirin and you have heroin. And they're not